We're living in a day and age where genealogy is easier than it ever has been before. There are literally millions of pages worth of documents available on the internet. And people used to have to go into archives and really dig through them and go through microfilms just in order to find something like a census. Nowadays, it's so much easier, but with that ease comes its own problems of potentially overwhelming the senses. In this series, I'm going through some beginner strategies for people looking to research their family. And a little while ago, I had talked about how if you don't know anything about your family and you just want to begin, you should avoid even looking at records. You got to pull out a pen and paper, call every family member that you know, and collect as much information from them as you can in order to get things directly from the source before trying to waste your time solving mysteries that might not actually be mysteries. People already might know the information, so your best bet at the beginning is just to talk to people that you know, ask them as many questions as you can, and take note of everything that's being said. Now, at some point, you're going to hit a period of time where the people that you're speaking to don't know anything more about your ancestors. And so you really have put in the work and the effort into interviewing them all, but you want to begin trying to solve some mysteries using the available records. So this episode is going to be an introduction on how to get started with family records. It's important to note that the availability of documents will vary both from family to family and from ethnicity to ethnicity. A lot is dependent on the background of each specific branch that you're researching and the circumstances of their history. So for instance, someone with African American ancestors is probably going to have quite a different time researching their past than someone who has Italian ancestors who immigrated over in, the year 1910. Every project is different depending on what the historical background of that group of people were. And so it's important when you get started to first at least try to recognize who your family might have been, and you can figure that out through some very simple steps. There are several main categories of records, and I'm going to break down some of the most common ones so that you can understand them. First and foremost, you have vital records. And this includes things that explicitly tell you details about somebody's birth, marriage, and death. So this mostly includes actual birth, marriage, death, and divorce records, but it can also be broadly expanded to include things such as gravestones and obituaries and anything that really gives you specific details about the life and timeline of an individual. Will and probate records can sometimes also be lumped into this category, but these can actually give you a much broader overview of the family dynamics, which is what we're going to be talking about in the next type of document, which is census records. Depending on the country and region your family comes from, censuses are an incredible snapshot of a family group within a specific period of time. So in the United States, in general, the censuses have been conducted every decade, but you have some states that even conducted their own state censuses in various years. A good example of this is New York State, which conducted a 1905, a 1915, and a 1925 state census, in addition to the regular federal one done every 10 years. So these types of records can be really, really key towards seeing who was living with whom, what addresses they lived at, what occupations they had. If you don't have any vital records for them, it can also give you pretty solid foundation for what year the people may have been born in. And you can also get really great information like the country of birth that the individual was born in. Now, if you do have ancestors who moved from one country to another, A really great category of documents are naturalization and immigration papers. And these can include things like ship manifests, petitions of naturalization, things like that, even things like passport applications. And these are fantastic for figuring out what villages and towns your ancestors may have lived in when they immigrated to the country that they did. And sometimes they even contain other details like family members and occupations and other things of this nature. So if you do have family that's been living in one place for a long time, you might not really have to deal with these very much, but a lot of people in the United States come from families that immigrated relatively recently to the US. So it's an important category to take note of. Last but not least, I'm just going to rattle off a couple of other key types of documents. This is not at all meant to be an extensive list. In fact, if you go on a website like Family Search and look for any given municipality, you're going to find literally thousands of different types of documents for a given town or county or country. So it's important to note that this video is supposed to give a very bird's eye overview of what you should be aware of when researching your family, because especially at the beginning, it can be very easy to get overwhelmed with just the huge number of documents available for you. So what you're going to want to do at the beginning is focus on the key ones. And a couple of the ones I didn't mention that I'm about to are things like military records. So this includes things like draft cards and pensions and things like that, which let you know about conflicts that your ancestors may have been a part of. And they also do help to give a good context in terms of where that person was at a specific point in time. There's also stuff like city directories, which you could probably lump in along with censuses as letting you know about, the physical location that a person was a part of. So how can you navigate all of these sources without getting overwhelmed? Well, the first thing to note is I do recommend signing up for a paid records website such as Ancestry.com or MyHeritage. Now you can access a huge number of records on FamilySearch.org. This is actually my favorite website for documents. But I do believe that some of these search capabilities on a website like Ancestry have some advantages that Family Search doesn't have, and Family Search has some advantages that Ancestry doesn't have. The other thing about Ancestry is that there's just a huge user base with a lot of public trees, so it's just really easy to connect with people. And in case you ever do want to take a DNA test, which we're not going to be talking about in this one, but in case you ever do, it's really easy to link up your DNA results on Ancestry. So I believe it's very much well worth paying the monthly fee if you can afford it. However, if you don't want to pay for Ancestry's annual or monthly fee, Family Search will do you quite well in terms of having a huge variety of records from which to access for your family. You're going to want to start with the first generation at which you are brick-walled. So let's say you know who your great-grandfather was. You know his name. You know that, he grew up in San Diego, California. But you can't figure out who his parents were. So the first thing you're going to want to do is try to locate him on a census. Always start with the records that are most recent and work your way backwards. And the reason for this is that, especially in a place like the United States, record keeping kind of got better over time, and the handwriting generally becomes more and more legible. So you're going to find a huge discrepancy between documents from, say, the year 1890 versus records from the year 1950. It might be a little bit easier to read the ones from 1950. You might have a much better understanding of, what names the person went under in a more recent period of time. And then you can gradually find them in the one before. So if you found them in the 1950 census, then try to find them in the 1940 census. If you found them in the 1940 census, try to find them in the 1930 census. Take your time, take it slow. Especially with things like censuses, you might not always find them on the first go because a lot of times the handwriting of the census takers is pretty horrendous. So even though, these things are indexed and transcribed on places like Ancestry and Family Search, you might still have to use some creative spelling in order to try to find your family member. When you've located a record and you can be reasonably certain that this is the correct person, you can go ahead and attach that to the person on your tree and save it as a source. And then what you're going to want to do is go ahead and try to find more sources. See if there are any vital records. If they were born in the country that you're researching in, see if there's a birth or marriage record available for that municipality. And if they were living at that specific address on the census, well, then there's a pretty good chance that they might be living at that address on a vital record. But sometimes you find a vital record where they're living at one address and you can't find the census, well, then you can look for the address on the vital record to see if you can try to find them in the census. So all of the documents are going to be interplaying with one another, and your goal is to collect as many of them as you can so that when you come to a conclusion about where somebody lived and what kind of life they had, that you have as much backing it up as possible. I'm not going to get too much into naturalization and immigration right now, but the same goes for this category of document. So sometimes on the censuses, it will tell you how long the person's been in the United States for. So if you can see that in the 1920 census, they were in the US for about 10 years, then you know that they probably came over around 1910. So you always want to focus at first on one category of reference, but then use the information in that reference to help you narrow down where to look in another category. I'm a very big fan of being efficient with your time when doing family research, and the only way to truly be efficient is to be able to use what you've learned from one place and utilize it in another place while being able to save the time of having to look, one at a time through whatever you're looking through. Unless that's your only option, but in most cases, there will be something that tells you things that if you would have just taken one closer look at it, it could have saved you 2 hours worth of headache. So that's why I very much advocate paying as close attention to the records as you find as you can. And if you have to, look over them many times before moving on to the next one. So always scrutinize, take your time, take it slowly. It's okay. It's better to be slow but accurate than it is to build a huge tree and make a lot of huge mistakes, which are going to cost you a lot more time and headache in the long run. So anyways, I hope this episode has been really helpful to you. If you got any value from it, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And also make sure to hit the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever I post new episodes like this. In the future, I'm definitely going to be doing things on specific categories of records. So some tricks for getting more deep into the nitty-gritty on vital records. Getting more into the nitty-gritty on immigrations and naturalizations. I've already done one on finding ship manifests for Jewish ancestors, which is the category that all of my family is from. I haven't even begun to get started on newspapers. I mean, newspapers are a whole other category, but for now, just focus on the primary ones. Censuses, vital records, military, immigration. Get those down solid, find what you can, and then the rest we'll get to in another episode.